All right, Joshua chapter 7. Recall that this is the account where Israel goes up to take the city of Ai, and they are driven away. They lose 36 men in that attempt. They're very despondent about it. Joshua's very upset about it. The Lord admonishes him and reveals to him their sin in the camp. And so they go through that process of finding out where that sin is, who's responsible for that sin. They get to Achan. Achan freely confesses that he has sinned in verse 20, Joshua 7, verse 20. And he reveals what it was that he did. He had taken the Babylonian garment, verse 21, verse 20, and then he says the 200 shekels of silver, a wedge of gold. He saw them, he coveted them, he took them, he hid them in his tent. They go and they get that out of his tent. They lay it out before the congregation. Very obvious. He's the one at fault. And it also gives justification, if you will. Here's what we're going to do to him. And that's where we are about him and his family being executed. So let's read Joshua 7, 24 to 26 as we round out this chapter. 7, 24 to 26. Hank, go ahead.
Then God sent a messenger through all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Gibeonites."
Joshua 7, 24 to 26. Who wants to grab that? Caleb, go.
And Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the garment, and the wedge of gold, and his sons, and his daughters, his oxen, and his asses, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had, and they brought them unto the valley of Achan. And Joshua said, Why hast thou troubled us? The Lord shall trouble thee this day. And all Israel stoned him with stones, burned them with fire, after they had stoned them with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger, wherefore the name of that place was called the Valley of Achor unto this day.
All right. So Achan, his family, their possessions are all taken out here to this valley of Achor. And it tells us, Joshua gives that rebuke. Why have you troubled us? You're the reason we lost 36 lives. You're the reason we're not able to progress. You have done something that's affected all of us. And so the Lord is bringing this judgment against you. This isn't Joshua saying, I'm personally mad, I have a beef, I have a grudge with you. This was a matter of righteousness because the Lord had told them, don't touch anything when you go into Jericho. And Achan had specifically violated that command. He had taken it for himself instead of it being dedicated to the Lord. And so this is divine retribution against him. This isn't a community prejudice against Achan, against his family. It's the idea you violated God's will. That has brought consequences upon us as a nation, as God's people, and it has to be rectified. And so they move forward with that. And in verse 25, where it says, so all Israel stoned him with stones, and they burned them with fire after they stoned them with stones. So the idea is they take Achan, they stone him to death. And then they stone his family to death. And then they burn all of them with fire. So they do that. Verse 26, raise up a great heap of stones that it says is still there to this day. The Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Any thoughts? I've got a couple thoughts on this. Does this seem like an extreme punishment?
I think to us it does. However, we know that God is trying to teach a lesson. It is surprising to me that Achan's the only one. I mean, with all the people that are there, and he's the only one. That surprises me that shows how dedicated the entire nation actually was to God. And they probably did not see this as extreme as we would, because they understood when God says something, their attitude was, I obey it. And you had one amongst them that did not have it, so I'm sure that they really understood what was going on here. Now God's trying to teach a lesson that we need to learn.
Okay. Yeah, I think, was it Ron, Nancy? Ron?
Yes,
And then
I
Hank?
was going to say something in our present day thinking and reasoning, we consider this to be unreasonable judgment. But as we know in the context of this, we're to understand the mind of God. And God looks at sin and the insidious nature of this sin, and that the result of its effect upon him and his family to eradicate it, so there's no continuation of it with his children and their descendants. Because we have record that that does happen.
Yes.
Put it into it.
Yes, Hank.
Well, I just want to add that the same thing, but the past generation just spent all that time in the desert from what they were doing, exactly the same thing that these guys just did, not obeying God. So they spent 40 years in the desert wandering.
Yes, and this generation is the generation that participated and at least witnessed, if nothing else, the man who picked up sticks on the Sabbath, and the Lord told Moses, stone him. Right? You violated my will. You're going to pay the price for that. And these lessons have been ingrained in them as a whole. To Mike's point, Achan and his family, and some people might ask, well, why his family? Well, if he took those things and he put them in his tent, well, his family, it seems, obviously knew what had happened, and they hadn't done anything about it. And so that consequence fell on all of them because they were participatory in that. One of the things I think worthy of noting here is this is essentially at the beginning of their campaign to take Canaan land, and this very shocking incident of God's righteousness and punishment coming against some among them is very similar to when they established the tabernacle and the worship. Remember back in Leviticus 9, Leviticus 10, and Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire before the Lord, and the Lord struck them down. Or Ananias and Sapphira, kind of at the beginning of the church, the establishment of the church, and they lied, and they're struck down. There are multiple cases there where at the beginning of something that God is doing with his people, he makes an example, and a very powerful one up front. This sin will not be tolerated. And so it would wake up this nation as they're continuing, or remind them as they continue on, don't do what Achan and his family did. And they were committed to that.
And I think that all of us could admit that we've done a lot worse than what Achan here has. So God's mercy is shown in our own observation with what happened here versus how he treats me with great patience and loving kindness. The mercy that continues to be extended upon us.
Right. Well, and you even think about Ananias and Sapphira, they lied for their own pride, or seems that, look, we're so great, we're wonderful, we're very charitable here in giving this. They lied about that. In our human mind, you compare that to false teachers like the Gnostics, or those who are trying to bind circumcision, and how that punishment, there's no record of that kind of punishment coming against them. But again, it's at that very beginning where God lays it down. Here's what I expect. I'm not going to tolerate sin among you. And so it's an object lesson, a very powerful one to everybody else among his people. So you've got that. Now, question number 4, I had asked, what does Achan's punishment reveal to us about the passing pleasure of sin and the regret that follows? So got the reference there. If you hold your place in Joshua 7, look at Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verses 24, 25. So Hebrews 11, 24, and 25. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Tanner.
By faith, Moses, when he had grown up,
Okay. So with that principle in Hebrews 11, thinking about Achan, what happened to him, any lessons we get out of that?
Well, I think that whenever we look at Achan, and I think you brought up the point, what was he going to do with this man? Was he going to wear it around, and stuff like that? So it really brought absolutely no pleasure at all that you could use this stuff with. But it was more of a trophy than it was anything.
Okay. Had one of the things that it made me think of with the Babylonian garment, right? Because that's more of a war trophy, ornamental, as opposed to like silver or gold. I can see him being like, well, I have wealth. I'll be able to, spend that somewhere, somehow, maybe one day. But that garment, he's not going to wear it. He's not going to have it hanging in his tent and his friends come by and see it. You think about in times past where you hear about an art theft, right? Maybe one of these great paintings by whatever artist, you would know them better than me, but they're worth millions of dollars and somebody steals them. Who in the world is ever going to be able to say to others, hey, look at what I got hanging back here in the back room or in my basement? They can't do that because word would get out. So he can't let other people know about this. He can't put it on display. It's just him taking it, putting it there, and just the knowledge, I've got that. Isn't that neat? So was he able, Nancy, to use it at all?
No.
Go ahead.
But the thing that this made me think about is that once sin is committed, it has an attachment of fear and guilt. Because even in the garden with Adam and Eve, as soon as God called them, they hid. So you don't see that at the moment of the sin, but it comes with the sin. So the momentary pleasure is often overshadowed by the guilt, if you have a conscience at all, and the fear of it being discovered.
Right. And he obviously feared being discovered because when they start going through that process, the tribe, it's known, hey, we got a problem. Tribe of Judah, then the family, then the household, then, boom. He didn't want that discovered.
And you look at the blessings that God gave them after this point, he gave them plenty of bounty that they could have of silver and gold and everything, and keep it away, So it wasn't that God wasn't taking care of him, but Achan couldn't see beyond that God will supply everything that I ever need. And so I'm going to keep this. I don't know what the reason was, but we see that God continues to bless them as they obey him.
Okay. To your point, chapter 7, verse 24, what does it say besides the silver, the garment, and the wedge of gold that they took of his and got rid of? They essentially killed oxen, donkeys, and his sheep. He already had possessions. It's not like the man was impoverished. He didn't take it because he was poverty-stricken. And when you get to chapter 8, verse 27, after they do take it says, only livestock and the spoil of the city Israel took booty for themselves. So if he had just waited, he could have had treasure that was taken in the next city. But he couldn't. He didn't. So it's just, to me, as one of those lessons, one of those very stark things in the Bible that jumps out. Sin is not worth it. And if you try to do it your own way, you go by your own desire, your own impulses, you're going to have a problem, and it ends up in death. And of course, we know it's spiritual death for us. But if you just do it God's way, you just delay that gratification, that satisfaction, you follow His will, you're going to be blessed when you do that. And so Achan jumps out as a very good lesson for us. Any other thoughts there? All right, Zach.
This is really tangential to this chapter, but it's interesting at the end, the valley called Achor and Achan. I don't know if there's a similar root in the Hebrew of he was bound for trouble. If it's not there, then it's nothing. But if it is, it's kind of interesting. Like the names are similar. The valley that he was buried or dumped at, and the name that he bore, and what he represented, or what he's at least known for.
Yeah, and that, yes, and to your point, that word there, Achor, is trouble, so valley of trouble. This is where they had trouble. This is where they took care of the trouble. This is where God troubled the sinner in this case. All right, let's jump into chapter 8. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time here. Verses 1 through 8 is where the Lord tells Joshua, go ahead, you can attack the city now. Essentially, the sin and the problem have been taken care of. It's been removed. And now you're going to be able to go forward and you're going to have success. And he lays out the plan for that there is the ambush that is laid for the city and the troops are split up, and it explains all of that. And it goes down through verse 29, showing how the people did exactly what God told them to do in laying that trap, in taking the city, and having this victory. Now, what this did is it opened up the opportunity for them to do something that Moses had written about and told them about while he was still alive. Here's what you need to do. So that's what I want to focus on here in Joshua 8, verses 30 through 35. Who will grab that for us? 30 to 35. Go ahead, Philip.
Now Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses. An altar of whole stones over which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And there, in the presence of the children of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. Then all Israel, with their elders and officers and judges, stood on either side of the ark before the priests, the Levites, who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, the stranger as well as he who was born among them. Half of them were in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded before, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women, the little ones, and the strangers who were living among them.
Okay. So, question number 6 I had asked, explain what Joshua and Israel are doing here and why. Any thoughts? Mike?
Well, I think that, at this point, they can no longer say, well, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. I mean, the law is being made known to them. There is no plea of ignorance at this point in time that they can make to God's law. Also, I think it is for those who did know to remind them the blessings and the cursings, because they were going into, this is only the second battle to take over the land. So they're fixing to have a whole other campaign that's about to happen. And don't forget what we're fighting for, who we're fighting with, and who the enemy is.
In a way, they're resetting. They're restarting from what Moses had done on Mount Ebal with an altar and the blessings and curses that God pronounced for them in Deuteronomy 27 and 28.
Mm-hmm.
So they're recognizing we ought to just start over and try again based on what we were told originally. Do all that is commanded. And when we don't, we have to come to God and come clean.
Ron, did you have something?
Yes, in the New King James, there's a footnote about renewing of a covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've been discussing this, also in they were in a covenant relationship, and it's like us. We can tend to lose sight of what our purpose is unless we renew that. And we have that opportunity no less than once every week to understand our purpose.
Mhm.
So that's what I see in this, is that reestablishment, and as Zach said, a realignment of their thinking to what is their sole purpose.
Right, right. With what they've been through with Achan and everything, and now that they've taken Jericho, they've taken Ai, they've also in this battle they defeated Bethel, as the text noted. So they're in there. They're kind of in the heart of Canaan now. It's not at the edge like Jericho, but they're there in the heart of it. And as they're there, they march up to this place, and it includes the women and children who are there. This isn't just the army. And they're in the heart. They have no fear of attack to go up there, because this is very vulnerable. They split the people on either side. There's one on, there's part of them on one mountain, part of them on the other mountain, and it's divided really between the legitimate wives of Jacob and their descendants and the concubines, and they're on the other. But here they are. They're split up. The Levites are in between. They're not in a defensive position. They're there as just kind of a gathering of a nation. It shows, one, their great faith in God. We're not going to be troubled here. And then that reminder and the renewal in their hearts and their minds, we're committed to God, because here's the blessings that he promises, and here's the cursings. And if you go back and you read that in the book of Deuteronomy, the cursings are way longer than the blessings that he gives. And so it's reminding them, stay faithful. We're in the land. It's being fulfilled. We're here, and we're getting ready to go on this massive campaign in the south, and then we're going to go up to the north. And so it's a good strengthening, renewing for them in that relationship to God. Any other thoughts there? All right. Well, let's press on now into chapter 9. Chapter 9, as they have another hiccup, so to speak, in what's going on here. Let's read just verses 1 and 2 to start with. So, Joshua 9, 1 and 2. Who's Jim?
And it came to pass, when all the kings who were on this side of the Jordan, in the hills and in the lowlands, and in all the coast of the great sea, toward Lebanon, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite heard about it, that they gathered together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord.
Okay. Question number 1, just simply, how did the city-states of Canaan react to Israel's victories over Jericho and Ai? Yeah, it brought them together. Other thoughts? So they're obviously watching the Israelites. I think, as Nancy's mentioned before, they would have had spies. They would have had their scouts. They would have been watching what's going on. And they see Jericho fall. And they see it fall easy. When Ai first repelled them, it probably gave them a little bit of heart. Like, oh, okay, maybe they're not going to be able to take every city so easily. But then they turn around and just obliterate them, as well as Bethel. So Bethel and Ai try to come together, and they're not. Wait a second, we better do something about this. Whereas before they would have been at odds with each other. They maybe not necessarily enemies and at war all the time, but I have my interest, you have your interest. Now they're saying we've got a common interest. We've got to keep these people out, and so it brings them together. Mike.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we see this today whenever you have denominations around us. The Baptists and Methodists will kind of spit at each other throughout the year. Maybe for Christmas they do together. But when you introduce a Campbellite into the mix, now they got a real common enemy. But, and that's how they kind of view us as, is combative about things, someone who shows exactly what God means, what he says, and it kind of bothers them, it shakes them. And so they're willing to kind of look over their differences that they may have in order to attack that member of the church.
Right. Yes. Yes. You've probably experienced that at work or at school. All of a sudden, these others who don't agree religiously, they'll align against you as you're trying to present the truth to them. Ron.
The alliance of nations we have observed in World War I, World War II, and in more recent times, the war on terrorism. But you see nations that come together, they form a treaty, they form a bonding agreement to go against a force, and what they consider an alien force.
Right.
So that's precisely, I believe, what we see here.
Yes.
To go against Israel.
Yes, exactly right. Now, here's the thing about it. We're going to read where there's a different tack taken by this other group, and it's not just one city; it's multiple. As you read down through the account, that they come together and say, "We're taking a different approach." And what the contrast is, everybody had essentially the same information. There's a group that said, we don't like it, we're not going to tolerate it, we're not going to put up with it. There's another group that said, we acquiesce. We accept what's happening here. So it's very interesting in those different reactions between those two. And we'll dig a little bit more on that in just a little bit. Any other thoughts, 1 and 2? All right, 3 through 15. Who will read Joshua 9, 3 through 15? Elijah?
But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors. And they took old sacks on their donkeys, old wineskins torn and mended, old and patched sandals on their feet, and old garments on themselves. And all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And when they went to Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a far country, now therefore make a covenant with us. Then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you dwell among us, so how can we make a covenant with you? But they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you, and where do you come from? So they said to him, from a very far country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard of his fame, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon, and Og king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. Therefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take provisions with you for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, we are your servants, now therefore make a covenant with us. This bread of ours we took hot for our provisions from our houses on the day we departed to come to you. But now look, it is dry and moldy, and these wineskins which we filled were new, and see, they are torn. And these our garments and our sandals have become old because of the very long journey. Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them, and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the rulers of the congregation swore to them.
All right. So it says these men of Gibeon, the inhabitants of Gibeon, verse 3. Later on, you'll notice in verse 7, they're referred to as the Hivites. So they're most definitely a part of the groups that God had listed out. Don't make a covenant with them. Don't make peace with them. You need to go in and drive them out of that land. So that's the first thing. In 2 Samuel 21, it describes them as Amorites. And for us, it might be like Tar Heels, Carolinians, Americans. Just different ways of describing them. That's the best that I can chalk it up to in here, because you see these different names. Overall, all the people in this land are considered Canaanites, but there's different groups of them, and some that would be specifically identified in that way. But be that as it may, the approach that they make, verses 4 and 5, what kind of approach is that?
Deception.
Yeah, deception. Why are they approaching that way?
I think it's a matter of desperation. People do desperate things in desperate times, and they, I believe, fully understand there is no negotiation here. They have nothing to offer. They're an idolatrous nation, and they see the pattern that has been set forth. So they turn to tactics of deception.
Okay. So they approach them deceptively. Verses 6 through 8 is where they begin to explain that. And verses 7 and 8 in particular, how does Israel initially respond? How does Joshua react to this?
It was suspicion first. Okay, so where are you from exactly? If you're from here, we're not gonna make a treaty with you. So
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of inquisition about who these guys actually are.
There's some caution here. They're like, who exactly are you? Where are you from? So there's a little bit of caution expressed, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but not enough caution expressed. And so the men go on, the men of Gibeon who are there, they go on in verse 9 to begin to explain something. Now, here's the thing. They're approaching them deceptively, but what they express has very real elements of truth to it, that they were being completely honest about why they're here and what's going on. So when it says there that, we heard about what you did. We heard about the kings of the Amorites. We heard about Sihon. We heard about Og. What do they not mention? Yeah, Jericho and Ai. Why would they not mention that? Yeah, they're playing right into this ruse that we don't know anything about that because we've been on a long journey and we heard far away about those and we just now arrived. And
Stephen, another point that you're mentioning here, we see another characteristic of it. They come in a submissive way with their hat in their hand, if you will, that we're servants. And so, they're not in any way exalting themselves against Israel.
no, they're not exalting themselves against Israel. They see Israel as superior. And in verse 8, when it says we are your servants, it's the idea is we will be your vassals. We want a treaty with you, and we recognize you are the superior in this arrangement. Philip.
This entire nation kind of takes the same, the same line of thinking as Rahab. Rahab was like, I know you're here. I know God's given you this land. Just, that's why I'm helping you. Just please save me. And that's kind of what they're taking the same tact. Whereas the kings in verses 1 and 2, they've kind of, like you said, they've got the same information, but they reject the conclusion that should be drawn from it. These people, they understand it, and they're just trying to save their own skin as best they can.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's interesting, the terminology that they use in this, in talking about, the Lord and things, especially as we get on down through here, they acknowledge this, that, we realize essentially you've been given this land. We're here to make a treaty with you. Now, question number 2, which deals with really 14 to 16, but what error did Joshua and Israel make when making peace with the Gibeonites?
I think verse 14 is the pivotal verse in all of this is being recorded for us, is that they did not seek counsel of the Lord.
Anything else, Cruz?
They trusted their senses, right? They could see, as opposed to the line on this original mention of God, which is what basically gave them victory in the past. So that piggybacking on Philip's comment there, not focusing too much on the physical and material, but on the spiritual.
Right. And they had provision to be able to approach God to find out His will in these things. Nancy, do you have something?
Well, they violated the first commandment about not making any covenants.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't matter how far the people had traveled from, they knew they were in that land.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing was they violated
Well, and you see when they bring up these cautions, who are you? Where are you from? That there's a caution flag going up in their mind, and they didn't follow through with that to find out from the Lord, hey, maybe we ought to pause here and check this out.
Inclusive in this verse, Stephen, is the mention of them accepting provisions from them. And therein allows for them to be also negatively influenced, as we know, by accepting gifts.
Well, and this is a part of that covenant thing that to seal the deal is the idea. They've come together, they've done this, and it is solidifying that alliance with them beyond the oaths that they took.
Also, this is a good lesson for them because of, we know the story that happens a little later, but it's a good lesson for them because it seems as if God is just kind of directing them which way to go. This is kind of the first time that they really should be going to God to ask a question, and they don't. So it's going to end up being a lesson for them that even, we need to start asking God of things, not just waiting.
Right. You think about this decision, a major decision that they're going to make this treaty, to make this covenant. You'd have to wonder, well, if you're from a faraway country, you have nothing to fear of us. Why would you be here? But when we have things before us in life, we need to be going to the Lord. We need to be going to His Word. He had specifically told them about covenant making, as Nancy said, and they're not going to ask Him. The Lord's revealed things in His Word. Those incidents come up in our life. We encounter an issue related to that circumstance. We need to be going to the Lord and looking at His Word. We need to be praying about it.
I think their egos are kind of stroked here also. And, some of the things that they say are actually bringing glory to God because they talk about Egypt, they talk about all those things. And so I think maybe the leaders and the elders are kind of deceived here by saying, yeah, well, that brings what we feel to be glory to God. Well, it really wasn't because it was a deception.
Yeah, exactly right. Very good. All right, let's read 16 to 27. 16 to 27, and this is where everything comes out. Who's got that? Zach?
At the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Jephthah, Merom, and Kiriath-Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when you dwell among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded His servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it." So we did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day in the place that He should choose.
Okay. So they find out about it. There's no mention of how they find out about it. Who knows? Maybe somebody discovered where they returned to, or maybe it is that those guys who had visited them were having conversations. Somebody overheard. Whatever it may be, they found it out, and they go down and they confront them over it. how does the congregation feel about this? The wider,
They feel their leadership has failed them.
okay.
Yeah, they were upset. To Ron's point, they're not happy with the judgment that they
Yeah.
received. They wanted to go out there and commit a second sin, right? The congregation wanted to, in a sense, almost fight back or retaliate against these Canaanites. And the elders said, no, right, we're not going to commit a second sin. We need to honor our oath, remember our service, right? So,
What had the congregation learned? It seems this is apparent right here.
They need to trust God and go to God.
Every time we've gone against him, it's not ended up good for us. So they've got that in them, and they have this visceral reaction. We just need to go wipe them out right now. And the leader's like, hold on a second. We have made a covenant. We swore in the name of the Lord. We fear those consequences if we break that. Mike.
Still, they did not go to God to find out what they ought to do. You know, maybe God said it was made by deception. This oath was made by deception. Go, destroy it. But they don't do that. So they're making decisions based on what they feel and what they think.
Okay. So I can't sort all this out. I just look at the big picture. What, if you fast forward, what becomes of the Gibeonites? Anybody know?
Well, immediately or
Down through the ages. So down through the centuries, going here forward.
in front of King Saul, when he brought the oath,
Eventually, yes.
and killed them.
Yes.
God punished Israel for breaking the oath.
Yes.
Can I, so when I was studying yesterday, on that note, one thing I do want to emphasize is that the Gibeonites were not weak people. They were actually, if you read the book, the chapter later on, it's actually referenced that they were greater than the mighty, although its men were mighty. So just like Rahab, right, they heard the God of Israel had done to Jericho and to Ai, and they became submissive, right, and honored to their God. And then the last note I want to make here is later on in Psalm 84:10, that says, "For a day in your courts is better than 1,000. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in its tents of wickedness." And that's basically what they did, right? They were servants to the God of Israel, as opposed to walking in wickedness and darkness.
Yeah, yes, we're going to touch on that here. So you fast forward through the history of Israel, the Gibeonites are not a stumbling block to the children of Israel. It seems even when you get to the book of Nehemiah that they have been absorbed into the Israelites. Just like Rahab was on an individual basis, it seems like these people kind of came into an alliance with the Israelites, and to Cruz's point, them working in the house of the Lord, they would not have been allowed to do that without having some measure of respect for the Lord. It wasn't like they were pagan idolaters doing these things right with the house of the Lord. So it seems like they eventually become absorbed. And when Saul violates that covenant, God holds them accountable for that. So that shows you God's position on this, that, hey, it shouldn't have been made, but it was made. And I don't know if it's because God recognized, hey, these people aren't like the rest of the Canaanites, and they've accepted my will. They have agreed that my people, Israel, belong in this land, and they are there to make an alliance, and they're not going to be an issue. And then also what happens in chapter 10, as a result, you can see God's overriding hand in this, that, hey, they made this agreement, and now it gives Israel an opportunity to strike against a group of them at once and to go after them.
It
Bruce.
shows that the Gibeonites meant what they said, right?
Yes.
Not only did Israel at that point in time keep their oath, they actually adhered to it and adhered to their customs and, left their wickedness to your point.
Well, and here's the thing about it. It's not as though the Gibeonites just walk off like, man, look what we got away with. Because the initial agreement was, we'll be your servants. And what they mean by that is, we'll be vassals to Israel. We'll be a kingdom that's subject to you, in alliance with you. But even though they were greater than I and they had mighty men of valor, they recognized very clearly, we don't stand a chance against Israel. God is with them. And it's interesting, they use the covenant name of God. If you notice, it's all caps Lord, so they're talking about Jehovah. So they have some conception of that, just like Rahab did. And they've accepted this, and they were, we'll be subject to you guys. But then Joshua says, look, because of what you did, you're not just going to be subject, you're going to be our slaves, and here's the work you're going to do. And they agree with that, because from their perspective, either we agree to be slaves or we're dead. And so they agreed to be slaves, and they work in that house, and eventually they're absorbed. And God actually sees this as a legitimate thing that the Israelites did because of Saul. 2 Samuel 21, it makes mention of that. He violated that. He attacked them. God punished them for attacking the Gibeonites. All right, any other thoughts there? All right, Lord willing, we'll pick up in chapter 10, and we're going to get into what happens with the day the sun stood still and all of that. And we'll press on. We're going to be moving rapidly. Chapter 10, 11, 12. The lesson after that is going to be a whole lot. I forgot to bring the question sheets. We'll get those Wednesday. But we're going to be moving quickly through this and concentrate on the reading associated with the questions. Concentrate on that. Though, I would love for you to read all of it. All right. Thank you all.